Hey guys, Masterxeon here. In this video I'm going to just discuss UV unwrapping and just do a little Q&A on some things. I know I've been a little behind on videos lately, but I didn't know I had a quota I was supposed to meet up to. So here we go, let's jump in and begin. This is just, I put that there just so the scene would look familiar. This is what we're going to be messing with to demonstrate some things about texturing. This is just a Puma man I've been working on. That's actually a woman. But we're going to start off with UV unwrapping. So, you go in Blender, this is your 3D view. First thing I like to do, usually when I'm modeling or I'm in the thick of modeling, is get rid of my floor, turn all this off, leave only the Z line. I don't need a light either. And we're just going to split our view. So I'm going to go through and unwrap all of these objects while trying to explain what I'm doing. So we're just going to start off and just make a 2048 map and go over to UV. And here we go. This is going to be the map that we're going to unwrap everything to. So I consider this like a puzzle. Shift E or Control E will bring up your edges specials where you can mark a seam. So we just come through. You usually want to. This is just for me. There's probably better ways to go about it, but this is just UV unwrapping according to me. I put the seams where I don't want them to be visible, so I just automatically always put it in the back. But there's that. Alright, unwrap, and the squares are here so you can see the continuity. You can see there'd be some seam issues there, but as long as it's in the back you'll be fine. For a plane, you would press U to unwrap and you're done. Have yourself a bear. Or you can U project from view and it will project what you're looking at onto it. So that's the plane. Next up is the cube. We will put a seam here and here. And so by cutting it here, it breaks it up into two separate islands. So if I press U, unwrap, here's that solution. Not utilizing the best space, so I can press L over an island, select it, scale it. Scale this one too. Usually you want your islands to be about the same size, but that's that. So this next one, this is actually the same as this. You take a cube and subdivide it. Oh, sorry, simplify is on. This is actually a scene I prepared for this. So that's pretty much all that is. So how will we unwrap it? Same way as before. Hold Alt, select your edges, and with UV unwrapping, it's not so much how you would unwrap this object versus this object. It's really, in my eyes, the philosophy behind it. You want to put your seams in a way that the model just falls apart. There might be some texture painting issues around these edges, but you know what? I think I'm good enough to get around that. So that solves this because its solution is the same as the cube. But basically you want to think in your head, here's how it finally came through to me is, imagine if you were violently slashing something into pieces so you could wear it as a mask. So now we'll move on to UV sphere. The easiest way would be to put a seam here, unwrap, and let's try to call that done. That could be done. However, I don't like how it ended up, so that's where you may want to mark a seam, clear a seam, and do the same at the bottom. And like I said, UV unwrapping isn't my best suit, but this is how I pretty much approach it. And so we put these back on the texture we just made. And here we go. So that's the sphere. And then you also have a couple of options. When you unwrap, if you look under your T panel, you have angle base or conformal. Conformal and angle base react quite a bit differently from each other. Usually I'll use angle base since it's selected by default, but if I want something to be a little more even and tolerable, then sometimes I'll just go with conformal, but it's definitely worth experimenting to keep in mind that there are two default unwrap modes. So That's out the way. Let's move on to the UV sphere. UV sphere is something that you could unwrap. I could unwrap just by just selecting all of this. Control E, mark seam, and if I unwrap, here's my texture on the UV sphere. And if you don't see your texture, sometimes you can click the X, remove your UV, and with everything selected, even put it back. So that's that. And the person I was talking to just a moment ago was saying he likes unwrapping chairs. So, go in local mode. How would you unwrap a chair? Well, I would put a seam here. And I would come through here and put seams. You just want to split it. That's all you want to do. Because if you don't split these objects, then it could be a little bit of a nuisance. I mean, I could have also, let's say you didn't want to add this geometry. My bad. So we'll select these faces. And I'm trying to be really quick with this so I can get to the fun stuff. And if we mark the seam, we could even do the same here. Just mark the seam. And let's see what we got. Unwrap. We look at it, and that doesn't look very, very nice. Or at least it could look better. So, let's go ahead and see what we can do to fix that. Well, the easiest way would be to select this on each leg. Actually, let me hold L, select all of this, hide it, and then we'll just deal with the legs individually. So we know that we're going to need a seam here. And this chair I built with the mirror modifier and applied the mirror modifier, but usually I would want to do some of my preliminary seam dropping before I would do that. But I wanted to show you all the long way of how I would deal with just some model chair. But you just want to think about how it would be if you were to cut it up and stick it in a manila envelope and send it to someone. You'd want them to be able to take it out and fold it together like some paper craft origami, right? So if we mark the seam and then unwrap, no sheared edges. And so that's the kind of behavior that you want when you're UV unwrapping. Turn off my alarm. So now for this top segment. And for this one, if we unwrap, this is what we get. And we get sheared edges. And for something like this, that's probably not the best way to go about it. The way to go about it is the fundamentals that you learned from the cube. And that is here, 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 here. And there's tons of other ways that you could do this. I'm just showing you all the philosophy that I go through when I'm unwrapping, because my goal when I'm unwrapping is to do no more unwrapping. Get in there, finish it, be done. But don't shear it so bad that your friends that you send it to pick it up next in a pipeline, aren't complaining about your UVs. Which brings me to the next thing, flipped UVs. So whenever you do your UVing work on the mirror and you apply the mirror modifier, you can end up with what's called mirror UVs, where your UVs look good in the editor, however the information on the U and the V is reversed. So what it results in is two islands that look the same because they're mirrored pieces, but they're not actually mirrored, so that the normal information that you bake to it comes out correct. So you end up with a map that looks slightly darker on the other half of your model. And we might be able to go over that. And so now the last piece. And all I'm doing is just selecting with L, pressing H or Shift H to hide everything but what I select. So that's something that I do use all the time. So I'm just going to mark the seam. Let's bring this all back. And this is what we have. So let's say you have a bunch of UV islands that you want to straighten up. You can select them all, Control A for average islands, Control P for pack them islands. But let's re-unwrap it, because this is our old job and this is our new job. So we'll clear that, bring this back, and voila. In fact, some of these normals are reversed. There we go. That is a chair. So let's look at another object. This is a robot I did not too long ago. Without any textures, this looks like a necktie right here. Use business bot, but enough tomfoolery. So for a robot, when I model, it's important to never. So triangles are there because I sent it somewhere to another application, brought it back, but forgot to remove my subdivision levels, so I get my low. So I ended up re-importing a high. So I use Decimate, and Decimate does good at reducing your, especially when you decimate and then you use the unsubdivide, you can actually get your levels back, but you will end up with some triangles. But I'm pretty sure that sometime in the future Blender will get that sorted out. So when it comes to unwrapping hard surface model objects, no interior faces. You out there modeling robots, you know who I'm talking to. No interior faces. I was talking to you about interior faces earlier. He who will not be named. This is an interior face. Actually, that's more of an interior face. And all I did was press Alt P and Alt J and raise up my threshold to fill this in. But this is now a solid piece. And if I unwrap this, it is going to look like, well, it's going to look like trash. So let's actually just get rid of that. But just know that interior faces are bad. When I look at this model, I don't see faces in here. I don't see any of that on the outside. Unless this thing is exploding or being destroyed or opening up or something like that. If you can avoid it, don't put interior faces, because here's what happened when you get rid of those on a plate metal piece. Bam! In the UV editor, we have a nice UV. And we put the image on it just to see what we got. And it's a nice unwrap. And so just know that for all of my models, I work by this pretty strictly, because I noticed it caused me quite a bit of pain in my UV unwrapping stages. But I can take this entire robot, press U, unwrap, Control A, Control P, done. That's it. That's all I have to do. There's no all-day task of unwrapping it and figuring it out, you know, just an ideology that I'm trying to preach to you in this video. So, you know, sometimes I'll come in here and, you know, play with some of the settings, you know, stretch them out, use proportional editing tool and blah blah, but you know, we'll get to that. So this object's been unwrapped. So now we come to a man. This is actually a model by one of my friends for a project we've been working on for a while, and it's almost finished. Or not really, but you know, it's moving along. But here's one of the sculpts from it in its lowest form. I just wanted to correct that part, it's still sticking out. If we were unwrapping this, how would you want to approach it? Let's unwrap it already off the bat. And we actually have textures. Where did these UVs come from? We'll delete the UV map and then unwrap. And this is what you get when you just choose unwrap. So let's deal with this methodically. Sorry, I'm at a loss of words. Isn't that rare? So use L, we'll Alt H, Shift H to hide everything but what we want. And we're just going to come through and make seams. So of course these are going to be seams because we're dealing with these individually. So here's the easiest way to do hands for me. Actually, let's try it again. So we need to hide this one, and then select it again, and this time it'll terminate early. And we'll just mark seam and do the same for this hand. And sometimes I'll just hide it just to prevent, just to end the edge flow temporarily. And let's see, at some point it's running up the finger. So, you know, you just got to follow your loops. This is where topology comes in. You have good topology, you don't chase loops. as often. Might still be chasing loops actually, but we'll just take this, come around, and Control E, mark seam, Alt H, unhide, and in face mode you can actually select UV islands with L and see which ones are your islands. Like we unwrap these, I got a pretty okay result, except for this. That's bad. This is what happens when you don't split it correctly. So which one is doing this? You know, this is the offending hand. So first thing I'll do is clear the seam, come back up here, mark seam, and let's stop it here. And now it comes up here. And you see what's happening. The thumb isn't getting its fair cut. So how to make the thumb happy? Sounds like the book of a gamer. Actually, this hand's topology seems a little different than the other hand. Alright, so at what point is it redirecting? Probably here. So we try it again. And it still finds its way all the way around. So if we hide this vert, select the thumb again, it ends. And so I said, I didn't even practice before this one, so sorry if I'm struggling more than y'all wish y'all would see in a tutorial. But UV unwrapping is a pain, isn't it? Everyone struggles with it. And so we take a look at our islands, and now we have our fingers split. However, there is an island just down here. So where does that go? It's probably part of the thumb. And you'll always end up with some UV strays, especially if your topology is bad. Usually I have a loop that goes along all of the thumb, all of the fingers, all the way across that I can just actually cut and cross-reference the arm. But this isn't my model. This is actually someone's game res model that had perfect UVs when I brought it in. Unwrapped by my buddy Thomas. Alright, so next part is the head. Mark the seam. And let's take the head in private mode and just see what we have to do. The head, easy. Across here. Mark seam. And if I press U to unwrap and go with angle based, then I have my head. And I could also cut out the mouth bag and make that separate. Talk to my girlfriend. And now let's see what's left. The body. And so for the body, what I like to do is come through, cut the bottom of the foot for simplicity's sake. And jump back into face mode. So it was telling me I should change my changers to be, my face changes to be number keys. That's definitely a good idea. I should probably try that. I haven't even remapped any of the hotkeys of Blender since I began using it. I definitely should, but I am pretty fast with getting around the usual way. Blender's default controls work pretty good for me. So let's see, what is wrong with this? If we look at one part, alright, so because when I select it with L, it selects everything, I can tell it's a continuous. And so there aren't enough cuts here. May not want to put the cut there. maybe would do better putting a cut here. Mark the seam, U unwrap, and now if we unwrap, we end up with all these pieces, and if we slap the UV on it, this is how we're looking. So the head doesn't get enough space, and the head is the focus, right? Like this is what everybody's worried about. So usually I resize the UVs myself instead of auto packing so that the head has a good portion of the UV, and then this stuff right here, you can use the proportional editing with O and really get in there and start controlling these UVs. And you could even get in with the sculpt and get even more control with these UVs. And then you could press N, turn off, lock borders, and even sculpt the borders to really just get that in there the way you want. So back in this mode, we have went through, what is up with this thing? I think it has vertex colors. There we go. Alright, so, oh yeah, one more thing. If you're in edit mode and your mesh is blue, you may want to make sure that you do not have show weights checked, which seems handy if you're doing some editing, but what it does is makes your mesh blue in edit mode, showing your vertex weight. So if we just Control G, look, now this is red. L, Control G, comes in handy, but if you forget it, it's a pain. So, that wraps up UV unwrapping. And so, that's basically where to mark the seam. So now let's look at baking. And so this model looks like it would be a UV nightmare. It's not, because there's no interior faces. And what does that mean? It means I can just press U and hit unwrap, and voila, I have all my UVs right where I want. Actually, Alt P because I pinned them, and let's look at an honest unwrap because that would be cheating. That's actually what they look like. Sorry I lied to you. Hope I can regain your trust. So, from here I could Control A, Control P if I want, get the UVs kind of lined up. But if your UVs on the left and the right look exactly the same, that means that you UV unwrapped it, applied the mirror, and now you're going to be dealing with an issue with mirrored UVs. If you don't know what mirrored UVs are, just know that they're real bad. In fact, I don't have the time to look up this page, but there was actually a web page where someone was talking about it specifically because it affects your normal mapping. So let's talk about cavity. Let's talk about cavity maps. That was something else that I was asked about. So we're just going to go to layer 2, move all this stuff to layer 0, go back to layer 1, and I'm just going to take the Puma head and put it on layer 2 and discuss cavity baking. So cavity baking is one of the many types of bakes you can do. If we look at this in vertex paint mode, you can see I've already actually made a color map. So the easiest way to do that is under vertex paint, brush, or paint, dirty vertex colors. And over in the T panel, you actually have the option to turn it to dirt only. Turn that off and on. And then, that's pretty much all there is to it. So to bake that, you would just go under your bake options and bake vertex colors. And this is something new that's been added to Blender. Very glad it's finally here because it's something that I needed. So I'm going to actually test my luck and hit Go Z to Blender. Blender to ZBrush. Alright, looks like I'm having some technical difficulties. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's always a gamble. Alright, and so from here you see I've baked my cavity map. So we're just going to save this as CAV. Actually, I should have named the folder textures and called the texture cav, but no worries. So the next thing is ambient occlusion. You want to bake ambient occlusion, I'm going to hit bake. If you check normalize, it won't use your colors. So let me click the object, make sure. Sometimes it'll say no images or objects found to bake to. And this comes up from a variety of reasons. Notice it's coming out too dark off the bat. So I'm just going to escape the cancel, hit normalize, and hit bake again. Like I said, the normalize will take more things, will take your AO into your AO into consideration, but not use the materials or the lighting information as part of its baking process. So notice that these UVs look alright, they're blender UVs, so by default they're a little grainy, but you don't want them to be grainy. If you're getting normals, if you're getting an AO map, you might as well get it to be on caliber with those that are using other programs like ZBrush and XNormal to make it. So that's just where you would raise this to say, I would raise it to 10. You could probably raise it to like 40 or 100, but it'll take eternity. So I'm going to hit this, bake, and then pause it. Alright, so that took a moment. But now that it's done, let's take a look at it. So the edges are black. Why are the edges black? Because this geometry is on the interior, receiving no light, and is touching each other. But if we look at the model, it will work. In fact, why is the other texture still showing? Okay, so I want to delete the cavity map. So the cavity map is like the AO, except it fishes out the minor details. And so that's my AO map. Another question was, how can I get a mask ID for Photoshop? Well, that one's a little more tougher. That's something you would want to do through your materials, but you would basically make a shadeless material, assign it to each area that you want in a mask, and then from there bake that out as well. So let's look at some of the other bake options here. Sometimes I use normals. If I'm dealing with normals, displacement is one I deal with quite a bit. I never deal with specular intensity or specular colors, even though it's useful to have them. So, that is pretty much this one in a nutshell. So the next thing that we would probably want to do would be go through and actually use these maps. So I'm going to open Photoshop, everybody's favorite program. So that also takes a moment to load, so I'll pause it. Alright, so I'm back. So I took a moment and just did a quick texture job on this. Not even texture, a material job where I just took advantage of my edge flow to assign material indexes. Literally coming through and doing this in a way that I would never promote anyone else to do, and that is to just use your topology to lay down some ground colors, But I just wanted to have something more to it because I only have 2 maps and that's boring. So we're going to make all these materials shadeless, and after making them shadeless, we're going to go back under the bake panel, choose full render, and go and turn off ambient occlusion, environment lighting. This is making it be incredibly slow. I tried to use just environment lighting to make it through this tutorial, but it's not working. So another thing is, y'all might notice that I'm using the internal engine. I haven't been showing the internal any love lately, and so I better get in and start using it a little more before they take it out of Blender. But the next thing we get baked out is our color map. So F3 to save that. We're going to just call that and save it. So Photoshop is open, and I even have my file. So I'll drop into color, and on top of that I'll drop into AO, and on top of that I'll drop in my cavity. And so the AO's first, and the AO is more for the macro details. So we'll apply this and just lower the opacity. This is what it looks like without it. This is what it looks like with it. And so it'll just give us a little darkening on the edges. Next thing is this one, the cavity, which we will turn into a multiply as well. And this one will only affect just the cavity areas. And I have my texture map. So if I wanted to take this a step further, I could go all the way back down to the color, W, and turn off, maybe raise my tolerance to 50. Maybe turn on num lock, raise the tolerance to 50. Maybe 30. No, fine. Select color range. Alright, and so we'll make a mask and Shift F5 to fill that up with whatever color. And this is our map. So, one moment, and I can grab another image that we can use as a test. Even though I know I'll hear it from some of my buddies, I'm going to go with a hex pattern. And we're just going to just fit it in roughly. Control J to duplicate it. And these are all separate islands, so I'm sure we'll make it. And done. So this is just to test these out, and we'll choose to rasterize layers, choose to merge layers. Not the smartest idea, but I can select this, Control Shift I, select inverse, delete it, and we see that there's some mistakes made. But for the sake of being a very quick tutorial, we'll take this, drop it below all of that, and turn off that layer. This layer was just used as a mask. And so I'm just going to change this to multiply and turn it down substantially. And so here's, what I'm going to just walk out with. And so I'm going to save as, and just call this texture. And we're going to come take a look at it in Blender. So this is what I have right now. First thing I want to do is delete all these materials. Add a new one. And select all UVs, click X, open an image. We're going to go over to Cav since it's in our recent. And this is what we end up with. So not, my best work, not fancy, but, you get the idea. So let's set up a quick lighting rig. So when I light scenes, this isn't the best advice, but this is just, advice from Xeon here. So I put in the sun, turn down the energy to maybe like 0.3, and just give this raise. And when I was using internal, my thing was setting up ray trace lights and then just scene lights, right? So that way I would be able to render a scene with a quick setup and then with my full setup, which would have all these ray trace lights casting buffered shadows, looking beautiful. So I always put a Hemi now, and if I look at these two lights together, it probably will do the job for me. But the Hemi is kind of my global illumination. I might use it to just turn off my specular. And so this is where we're at so far. And this thing is a bit too hard. Maybe like that. maybe 0.08, you know. Render. And you know, as soon as I finish with this, I have to get to work back on this project I've been working on for a gig. But I thought I would take a moment to put out a video so people don't think I ran away from my YouTube or something. And so with the area light, you want to lower the distance because this thing hits the head or hits your object and it's going to begin breaking through, or at least from a character perspective. So next thing I'll do is select the light, select the head, and choose track 2. That way I can just duplicate and it'll always point. We'll just change this one to blue. I tend to favor the outdoor lighting styles. And so we render this out now. Much more interesting setup. And turn ambient occlusion back on. Lower the samples down to 5 for fast render. And I could actually do without re-enabling that because I could just multiply it over the texture alone, which is why baking would be important. But for the sake of this tutorial, we'll have it on. So now we can give it new material, call this final helmet. Jump over into the textures, image, change this to be texture. That's a very useful name. Naming these things will definitely lower the amount of insanity. If I render it out now, this is what we get. For some reason it's showing my it was showing my texture over there. Might have been a glitch. And we'll just change this back to sky. Because also turn it to transparency so there'd be no background. But this is what we're dealing with so far. So next thing is the gloss map, because the gloss on this is kind of not showing my nice hex pattern. In fact, I might even go back into Photoshop, get rid of this honeycomb, turn off all these layers, have this layer on, and actually make it just a little smaller. Alright, let's jump in on this and, you know, just line them up. Make it seamless. Choose both these layers, rasterize. Alt M, Control M doesn't merge in Photoshop, so Control J. If you don't have Photoshop, you know, you could use GIMP, but if you don't have Photoshop, you should Google how to get Photoshop. You didn't hear it from me. And we'll merge these layers, Control J, and but if anyone from Adobe's listening, buy Photoshop. Just go buy it, you know, for like $10,000 or however much it costs now. And we're going to Control click, Control Shift I, delete, and put this where the honeycomb copy was. And maybe we could try changing it to, well, actually, I would like to change it to invert. There we go. we'll save this as, and just know that when I'm making a character, I am running through their entire body doing this. So I am obsessed with doing it in the fastest, most possible way to, meaning the fastest, most possible, possibly quickest way I could get in and get out, because these are not things I enjoy doing. So the next thing that we're missing here is, the specularity is off. So now that that first issue is out of the way, I'm going to change this back to Ward ISO and increase the slope. That makes it a little more gentle. The other thing is reflectivity. This is a metal helmet. We should turn on mirror, right? Wrong. There's nothing in the scene to reflect, so that's just a waste of time. It's easier to just fake the reflection. We'll just call this reflection. Alright. And bring in an image. And for the old internal engine, I used to have some HDRIs that I just got off of some Cinema 4D site like this, and I will apply it to the material itself instead of as environment lighting, because I don't want it to add to the render time at the expense of a little bit of accuracy. So if we change the mapping to normal, this is also how you put a normal, how you put a matte cap on a material. You map it as normal, and so it overrides everything. We turn down the color, but we could also just change the blend mode to add. And now we have it on top, so we put this down to say 0.225. And by rules, I always divide it by half if that doesn't work, and that did not work. I mean, it could have worked. Too shiny, and too shiny. So we'll try it again. It's a very dominating studio light setup, but whenever it's put on correctly, it just helps the model quite a bit. In fact, another thing that would help is maybe this light should get a promotion. Sir, you now have ray shadows, but only 2. And this light, you've been good to me. I'll give you a ray shadow too. We render that out. Render time's going to take longer, but we'll get a little bit more complexity with our lighting, especially in some of these cavity areas. So there are some minor details here I feel we may be losing. So I'm going to actually go out of order on my textures and apply the cavity on top of the reflection. And take the cavity, set it to be UV. Don't need to set this because it's already on the default. We just want to multiply. And this is what it looked like before. If you press J, you can jump to another render layer where you can F12 again and actually compare your renders because you have these render slots. And so this might make no difference. It might make a little difference. But, let's look at it. Now it's slightly darker. So having it at 1 is not going to work for me. But maybe 0.3. Maybe 0.666. Alright, so we'll render this again. Sorry, I just had to get silly for a moment. Maybe 666 is not being very good to my model, so we will lower that. And so here we go, we're off to a start. So the next thing is gloss maps. So a gloss map is something that you would normally use for a game, but I don't think this one, unless I populated the scene with a lot of things to turn on mirror, would not be of much benefit. But basically you can take a map and use it to control the modulation of your reflection, right? So I'm going to lower my reflection, bring this up above so it's in order, and we're just going to make another texture, call this is going to be the AO, because you think that the cavity and AO would be the same thing, but the AO actually has a little bit finer, is a little bit better for me in texturing for reasons I can't explain. So all I can do is change this negative stencil, RGB to intensity, maybe not that one. Alright, and let's make sure this is on. Not affect any color, my mistake. And we want it to actually just affect just the one below it. So this is where my knowledge of the internal is going to need to come in. Alright, so we're just basically going to use the AO as the gloss map to cut it out. So we're using the darks of the AO to cut it. So I'm just playing with the contrast. You would normally go about this a different way, but for this instance, let's see what we get here. And that might be too much contrast. And let's also bring that specularity back up. But we want to tighten it up. Alright, so here's what we got so far. So you know it would make this look a little better if we made a specular map. So this is not the way you should make a specular map. That's my disclaimer. But I'm going to show you how I would go about doing it. So first I want to save my PSD. This has been good to me. Alright, and so now with that, we just want to layer, new, why is Photoshop always different? Alright, and we're just going to Control J, duplicate it, and change this to black and white. And we're just going to play with our levels for a little bit. Just know that where it's white, there's going to be spec, where it's black, there's not. And so I'm not really going for anything except a diversity really in my values. I don't want it to be part black, part white, you know. I want there to be some areas that are kind of specky, kind of not, you know. And we'll go ahead and save this out. We'll just call this spec. Alright, we'll just put those down there for now. And we're going to add a image and go into Cav and open up our spec. And by turning off the specular here, I still have some control over this, but basically it's only going to be in the areas where I actually want it. And if you look at the ball here, you can see that it actually isn't even set to the UVs. I'll look at that ball a little closely. And so now if I render it out, things will be different. And so now we look back at the image. I went through, doubled the resolution that I originally had because it was 500 by 500, which is like an icon. And also lowered this down, changed it to add, but now I have my spec in here. So I have my spec, I have my cavity, I have my AO, and I have my reflection. So what else can we do with this? Well, you know, we need a normal map. But how do you get a normal map? Well, we can generate it a couple of different ways. We can do things, actually let's do it that way. We could do some things to this, and then bake it. So let's actually go that route. Are y'all ready to see my computer crash and freeze? Because that is what's going to happen now. Multi-res. Simple. No, wait. My mistake. Subdivide, subdivide, and subdivide. Alright, my computer is going to be a lot slower. In fact, if I go under my user preferences, Control-Alt-U, that won't load. Oh, here we go. And while your system's freezing, you know, you want to take this time to grab your handy dandy tablet and make sure your VBOs are on. And we're just going to go on sculpt mode. I never sculpt in multi-res because I think there's a little more optimization that can be done. And so I'm just going to hold on for that. But, you know, on second thought, let me show you how I would normally make a texture map, you know. No need being fake on my video. So we're going to click this button this time. Actually, let me pause it. This is to export it to ZBrush. So I'm going to pause it, hit this button, and then see what happens. Alright, so GoZ went crazy, so I ended up having to export the mesh manually. But before I start resuming it from ZBrush, right here, I want to show you all that when you save your files, it's always good to copy your relative path. So that way when you go over here and go to import in another program, it's not going to know where to look, and it's definitely not going to look in the right directory. And I absolutely hate just surfing through directories looking for directories, especially if I'm not always remembering what the names are. So that is where I would just paste the name in here. It'll bring up the folder eventually. Like I said, my computer has gotten a bit slow, but that is because of the amount of things I do at once and management. But now we have our mesh imported. And in ZBrush, you have all sorts of interesting options. I'm not really going to turn this into a ZBrush tutorial, but just know that I can auto group it. And then I actually have options to mask by polygroups, which you can also find in your brush panel under auto masking. You can mask by polygroups. So that'll allow me to sculpt without going over into the other group. And so I'm just going to divide, 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 and you know, cross my fingers and divide again. And press X to turn on X mirror. I'm just going to come over here and just make some enhancements, right? Because in ZBrush, I already have it down packed. I mean, I could do the same thing in Blender, but I just want to show you all just how these programs all just play along nicely. So I have my mech inserts that I absolutely adore and made myself. And I can just drop these puppies on it. In fact, for some reason they don't show up on the opposite side. Why is that? Okay, the mask by polygroups. Sometimes it works with me, sometimes it's against me. But it's just important to know that it's working. And so you should turn it off if you're being driven into a corner from insanity by wondering why things are acting strange. So I'm just going to choose some of my favorites and just do some stamping. And so this is actually into the geometry itself. In fact, I divide it again. My computer is going to freeze. Or it might respond. It might respond, but it looks frozen. Oh my god. gosh darn. Alright, so I probably have crashed ZBrush. But just know that this is the part where I would go in and start cutting my mech lines and just all the, the sub detail that makes it interesting. Oh, for Christ's sakes, just close it. Just close it. Alright, sorry about that. I wasn't aware I was muted for so long. So you saw me go through, sculpt, bake the displacement maps, bake the normal maps. But basically when it comes down to these maps, the difference between normal and displacement, you're going to see me use the displacement a lot differently than how you normally would, but just know that normal affects the lighting information in a way it affects the surface, but doesn't add any geometry. So even if you normal map the queue, it would still be faceted on the sides, but the surface would show the detail, which is probably a bad way to explain it. But displacement, on the other hand, is something that would actually show up via the geometry being displaced at render time. So that would require more divisions to get to show through more dominantly. And so I'm going to go ahead and render. And now my normal detail is there. And it's a little hard in the areas where I actually did it. For example, right here it's a little hard. Right here it's also hard. So usually I'll come through and divide it by 2. And also do keep in mind that if you don't check normal map, it will look very bad. So now let's go back over to Photoshop, which is the last program that survived the onslaught of programs just crashing on me. And we're going to reopen that PSD. And go in our maps and just drag the displacement map onto here. And I'm just going to Control I, invert, or first I guess I have to rasterize it, and then Control I, and then change to blend mode. So one of the things I like about Photoshop is you can actually just arrow through the blend modes. One day Blender will have this functionality, but in the meantime, Photoshop has it. And I'm going to go with a hard light. And also I would tweak the levels a little bit, but this will do. I'll save as, go under JPEG, and we're going to overwrite texture 2. Alright, my mask still transforms, good. And we're just going to go up to color, hit the reload button. That updates it. In fact, if we look at the texture, might be able to see it just a little bit. Probably not. Let's just bring up texture 2 here. It's definitely there. So if we Alt Z, here we are looking at it in multi-layer. We change it to be GLSL, which I don't remember what it stands for. We can actually see in the viewport just what we're dealing with here. But all I wanted to do was just make a little white there, so that way when I render it shows through. Alright, so before I conclude, I want to go back into Photoshop and create one more. This one's going to be a pseudo normal map, but the goal is to displace this area. So the white will be, this is pretty much bump mapping, right? So it's going to, the white will be pushed up, the black will be pushed back. In fact, I want to invert it if it lets me. And let's look at our levels. And yeah, some of these practices would be a little bad to actually do, but for the sake of this tutorial, I just want to show some of the versatility you can actually get with it. So I'm just going to call it a pseudo bump because normally I'd go through Photoshop and cut everything that I didn't want to be pushed up or down. push these down a bit too and add another image. Open it up, go to CAV, and bring up the pseudo bump. Alright, and now we want to make it affect the normal information, not on some random generated, but on UV. And this is what we get. So if we change this to be best quality, that improves it slightly. And we want this to be 0.005. And now you can see in the viewport just a little bit of what it's doing. So this is what we were looking at before. We'll jump over to another layer slot. And here we go. So now the texture has been Spider-Man'd a bit. And if I wanted to, I could take this helmet from where it is right now and choose to bake the normals. And uncheck multi-res. And popping up should be our updated normals, or the normals that we applied as the normal map to the intensity, and then the mesh design itself. So if we were exporting this to a game, this would probably be one of my final maps that I would use. Notice that the margins will allow it to touch. So if we lower that to be about 9, my mistake, not one to render, want to bake, then these won't touch. But you know, touching isn't so bad because the whole background is going to be filled with gray, but you don't want it to warp into the wrong areas. But we look at this, this is a pretty alright result. In fact, I think at some point we lost our fake environmental reflections. Alright, let's go to reflection, and we're going to bring it up a little bit, but also we're going to go ahead and just change out the image. This one I've been using for a moment, and that one's actually my favorite one, but there's other ones here. Here is actually one of a sci-fi scene I did where I rendered a sphere in the scene. In fact, if we look at it, this is a sphere in the middle of the scene rendered to look like this. So if I take this and, you know, apply it to the normal, then it gives more of a scene reflection. So if we look at it in 3D view, it isn't going to show it very strong. So I crank up the color, but that's too much. Now let's look at it. Watch it look worse. And now we look at this. So I went back and turned on environmental lighting so I didn't have to add any more lights. Lazy way of working, but it's the way that I chose to go through. And so here we are with our final textures. And I even turned off AO. Let me re-render that just so y'all can see everything on, so I can pretend that all these textures were tuned to perfection. Alright, so that was the render. So now the next thing is I'm just going to go over a couple of texture painting practices. Since I seem to be discussing it so much with people, and I wish that I just had a video on it that wasn't incredibly old that I could just link people to. So I'm going to go over the way that I used to do it and the way that I handle textures now. So right now I'm just looking for a face to use. So the first thing is you want to know how to unwrap a head. Between you and me, it's important to know how to unwrap a head. So to go over it again, First we have to delete the UVs. And if I select this and press U to unwrap, I get a nice unwrap. And why is that? Because there's a seam going up the back of the head and coming around the sides. That just gets me a nice UV every time. The ears aren't the best, but you know, I could actually go in with sculpting Q and just sculpt, smooth, sculpt, smooth. Actually, for the sake of this, we'll just let it go. But basically, you don't want anything overlapping. Overlaps will cause your UVs to not work out very well and cause you big headaches and artifacts. And, you know, geometrically, I think there's something not working there. And also, you may want to disconnect your mouth bag. But for this, we'll just at least smooth it. Smooth, 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 smooth. Alright. So, that's this. We'll call this good UV. Make a new image. 2048, 2048. That's my lucky number for this computer to be allowing me to do this and not crash. One day I will have a computer so powerful that y'all will be blown away by the magnitude of what I'm able to accomplish. But in the meantime, I will become the master of low poly by using what I got. So for some reason, did not put the UVs on the image. And I think I know why. It's because I'm in sculpt mode. If I select all the UVs and then select the image, then it comes up. So that's, you know, one of the caveats of Blender are little things like that. And it's not a big deal, but if you're not aware of them, it will make you say, I hate UV unwrapping. So this is our good UV. This one is going to be called Side Project because this is our side project. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole range of women to choose from, but I don't want to use the most famous girl in existence, which is the model model used for texture painting, the Blenderella model. So we'll go with this girl. So we'll drop it in here, and you project from view. And so now we just got to get the head to fit. Not only do we have to have the head fit, we also need to find an image that maybe doesn't have her at 3/4 for something that we plan on doing on side projection. Maybe more like this one. Alright, and so all we have to do is get this head to fit from the side to the best of our ability and patience. This is horrible. This image has no resolution. We'll use this person instead, even though the camera is hitting the face a bit hard. I know I should have prepared the stuff in advance, but I didn't. Spur of the moment. And it looks like I chose another angled image. And then, you know, UV sculpting is definitely something that shines here. just getting it roughly to fit. So here's my side project, and now front project. So we'll use this image, front project, and it wouldn't have hurt to hide the back faces. In fact, if we did that, it'd be a lot easier to deal with for sanity's sake of just dealing with only this and getting rid of the mouth bag. So now, more sculpting. Oh. What brush is this? It's probably the destroy brush. Alright. So you want these views to be right in certain areas. For this, worried about the middle of her face, worried about her eyes. But just know that working like this isn't how I normally work. I'll show y'all kind of how I go about texture painting now. I actually do texture painting more as studies to get a better understanding of my human anatomy. So I'm trying to paint the colors that build up the face so I can eventually build faces without even the use of photos. But here we go. Front project, side project. And if we go to our good UV, we can actually jump into texture paint. Change it to the clone brush. We'll set the strength at max. And we're going to clone from UV map. We're going to clone from side project. Alright, and so I'm done. This is actually good enough to be in a game, in my opinion. No, just kidding. But it looks horrible from the front. Looks alright from the side, but it's horrible from the sides too, to be honest. So we're going to change it to good. We're going to change it to clone from what should have been called front project. We're just going to come in and actually fix the front part because we spent time getting the front a little bit better. Looks like I got her a double chin now. Alright, and so this is where the clone brush earns its name because you're going to have to uncheck that and 3D project cursor paint and, repair the face. And this is something where Photoshop would also come in handy at. And you would, take this into Photoshop. In fact, let's say that I did. Let's say that I right-clicked Photoshop, went to its properties, obtained its path, went into System and File, and pasted it in here so Blender knows where Photoshop's at. And we'll call this particular UV, we'll call this Face Paint 1. But as far as the UV goes, this isn't half bad. I mean, you could actually go through, do a lot of fine tuning, and take it into Photoshop, like I was saying, and just take it to another level. And they're telling me my image editor is not found. So we'll just and I would just be clone painting and repairing this, but I'm not even going to waste your time because this video is getting long and I don't even like face painting. I mean, there's specular information on the side and it's just a nuisance. So we're actually going to go through the vertex paint method, which is one that I use personally. Now there's some images that I actually refer to on human models quite a bit, and that is something I'll show you as well. So we'll come out of this. Right here. This was an article that I snipped from a magazine. I believe it was Imagine FX, but they were talking about some of the color zones of the face and pretty much just how this, in conjunction with properly managing your SSS, you can come up with realistic results. But then this one, they were talking more about painting. But in vertex paint, you only can paint your vertex density. So if you don't know what that means, you should find out. But if you're watching my video and you want to find out from me, just know that the amount of vertices you have determine the amount of paint you can have. So every point could be a color. So this could be, I could paint this one red, this one red, I could paint this one blue, this one blue. But the reason I like this more than just raw texture painting is it's so simple and easy. In fact, I'm going to Shift K to fill and Shift K again to reset. And I'm going to dirty the vertex color so I see what I'm looking at. I'm just going to go through and just paint this color scheme. So the easiest way would probably be to, if I hold S, it'll sample the color in the 3D view, but they haven't yet put that in the UV image editor. So that's something to be looking forward to. So we'll paint this part up here yellow, jump down here, paint a little bit of red. And the vertex paint keeps it simple, but know that it doesn't work on normals well. So if you're painting around the surface, it could be a little bit of an annoyance. And we're just going to just paint in some just overall tones. And I'm just pressing S to resample other colors since I've laid in most of my base coats. And I'm actually going to select the lips and hide my selection to just be only that. I'm just going to Shift K to fill that and turn off face selection. In fact, I need to Alt H, unhide everything, then come through and do that. So this has to be hidden. That one also has to be hidden. And now, in face mode, Shift K, come out of that, press Z till I'm back here. Now I can continue my head. So, what happened to that image I linked in? Well, it went over here. If you hate this happening when you go in edit mode and your image jumps, click the thumbtack and it will stop doing that. And so that's your Masterxeon tip of the day. No, just kidding. This whole video hopefully was a tip of the day. I haven't done anything on texture painting in a while, and I just wanted to show y'all that I'm still at it. In fact, I haven't even made any videos involving sculpting humans because I want my skills to be a little better before I try it again. I mean, I've been getting some comments of people telling me about the anatomy, and yeah, I know the anatomy is bad on some of my models, but I'm getting better, and people are pointing it out to me every day. I mean, not that I'm getting better, but things about anatomy. Critiques are definitely important to you as a 3D modeler. If you can't take critique, you're never going to improve. You need people that are willing to brutalize and bash your pictures and point out the things that you would not be able to notice, like this character is unattractive, or are you sure you want this person to look retarded? These are things you definitely might not see yourself, but other people will definitely point it out quickly. So, not too much to paint, but we'll go ahead and take that and bake it. We'll bake the vertex colors to a UV. And so I didn't do a whole lot here. I'm just focusing on the face this today. But we'll call this face paint 2. And then before that, before we go back into Photoshop, I'm going to make another layer, jump into vertex paint, fill everything with white, dirty my vertex colors. Might as well bake that too. And look, they want me to delete the old one so they can bake the correct one, which I probably could have checked the camera and that would have done it too. So here's my bake of face paint 2 cav. And the cavity map, if you duplicate the mesh, apply to sub D, then do this dirty vertex colors, you'll end up with a much higher quality map. And so the next thing I need to do is get an AO. It's actually 10:20 and I'm supposed to be somewhere right now, so let's get this wrapped up. Alright, also, on my on my on my YouTube page is a link to add me on Google+. If you're using Google+, then if you're using Google+, then you can add me and you can always message me, chat, talk Blender. We have quite a few meetups and discussions on Blender nowadays where me and a bunch of users will get together and just talk about just various things of the program. So here's our first map. Map is shite. So that map is to be forgotten. But this one is also a bit bad, but we're just going to go in and just play with Photoshop's tools. Gaussian blur is a good start. Not too extreme. And then we're just going to drop a couple of other maps we have on it. So there's this one, which if we multiply, game over, man. You start seeing some depth being added. And the cavity especially. But the thing with the cavity is sometimes you got to play with the levels to get it to work right, or else you're going to get very dark results. And so under image, adjustments, levels, do we want to push the blacks out? Do we want to keep the blacks in? This isn't a question of racial equality, I'm just talking about this texture. And so change this over to be multiply as well. We'll lower the intensity. And then we'll bring up the first image. And let's look at her face. She is very white. So we'll take a white color, jump over to this, and Shift F or Control Shift N for new layer. Put it on my other screen. And Shift F5. And we're going to lower this down to be, let's look through our blend modes of what we have here. I was actually experimenting when I was first showing this and actually found one that worked better than my usual one. This one looks good. So now it's time to get personal with this one. First, so we'll duplicate this, put it below everything, Control J, duplicate this because it's the only way we can edit this sucker. And we're going to go into image, saturation. On the critique that I received from Thomas, he was telling me that my colors were too saturated, and that was what was causing it to look unnatural. So we're just going to bring down the saturation quite a bit. Maybe also the lightness. Maybe bring it up. And then increase the saturation. And I'm just playing with my results here. I mean, I could go with colorize to just make full on skin, but this is very, very bright. So adjustments, color balance. Actually, this one is on layer burn, so we changed to multiply, image adjustments, curves. And usually I just go in Photoshop, play with tools till I get the result that I want. And you know, we'll just call it a day there. Like I said, gotta run, gotta run. So we call this face paint PS1. And jump back over into Blender. And we're going to start off by turning off ambient occlusion and environment lighting. So otherwise, the render times will be immense. We're just going to throw in a spotlight and point it at the face. Where's the camera? Where is the camera? It's right here. So I just want to make sure that this light is hitting this person in the face. And so here's our head so far. This is where we're starting. Now, I am no expert at SSS. In fact, if you know more about SSS, you will be offended by my explanation of SSS in the internal render, because it's something that I just haven't been using a lot lately. But just know that there are blogs online. There's Ben Simmons, who wrote a very spectacular guide on how to use tri-layer SSS to get realistic human skin results. And that's pretty much the method that I use in my general process, but in this one you're just going to see me actually muddy through it with just one. So here I am with my skin texture. The red is definitely too saturated, but too late for that, or is it? Render it again. Get those rosy cheeks out of here. Alright, so next thing is we're going to turn off specularity, and we're going to go ahead and just give it a skin texture. For the skin, I just tell people, you know, just use clouds. Just use clouds. You know, people want to bake all their maps out in XNormal and all these other applications, and then do it, dedo, and, you know, it's just easier as a Blender user, just use it in Blender. So here is the look I'm going for. Halloween pumpkin. Oh wait, no, we're making a human face. So lower this down to 0.05. Render it again. And this time I'll just divide it by half. And I bet if I divide it by half one more time, I'll get the result I want. And if I change this to 0.005, then you might not even see it. 0.05. You know what else I like is using Verona Crackle for my noise for the skin. And there's a lot of ways I could go about getting more control on this. For example, I could use a color map in cycles to choose how much of it gets added onto the face. I could bake it out as a normal and fine tune it in a photo editor, all sorts of things, but I'm just going to try to make a passable one for today. And so next thing is subsurface scattering. First thing I do is turn the error up because it's just easier, and we'll just hit the entry color to be a little pinkish red. And we'll set this to be 3, 2, 1, blast off. Maybe this to be 6. And then the scale, 0.005 is where I'm going to start today. Now, whenever you're using a head, you want to take the scale into consideration. It does use real world units. So usually I'll just take the scale and continuously divide it by half, but I'm just going to save you time and let you know that my favorite value is 0.02. And by raising the error, you can actually control how long it actually takes. So usually I'll reduce it a little bit. I just want a little bit of softening in the shadows, not just 100% insane SSS. And so that'll be a start. So the next thing is backscattering. Backscattering, if you don't know, is the effect of light breaking through your translucent human skin. So we'll change this to be a point, put it behind the ear, where there should be a quarter, and we're going to call this face 1, save the file, remove the material. Add a new material, we're going to make this one dark, turn off specularity, turn off front scattering, turn this one up to 2, 6, 3, 1. That's just how I feel today. I'm just feeling like so if we render this out, let's see what we got here. And so this will probably be, the worst SSS tutorial ever, but, I got the effect that I'm going for here, using 0.02 because of the scaling of the scene. Usually I'll put in the value divided by 2, but this color is going to be my bleeding color, and this is basically my texture color. So with these two, we're going to call this done, but more importantly, we're going to call this backscatter. Click the F, turn this into a node editor, and remove that, and we're going to call this skin combo and use nodes. First node we're going to use is face 1. The next one we're going to use is backscatter, and nodes are pretty much the same all over Blender. So in this one we're just going to choose to add this effect to this material. If we render it out, it's going to render 2 passes of the SSS, but we should have our nicely textured head with nice SSS, easing up the diffuse while also having and so we'll raise up the add factor. And so this will be the result that we'll live with. And if y'all are more interested about using the internal shader, definitely let me know in the comments, and I can jump off cycles for a bit and just show y'all some things. But this is pretty much it in a nutshell. I wish I was able to go more in depth on skin, but really this was over just normal mapping and using all the maps and a little bit of Photoshop. So if we render this out all together, let's see what the final render looks like that y'all have been here with me for on this whole texture adventure with all day. And of course this render is going to take a while. SSS is no joke, which is why you should turn that error up. But the final result speaks for itself. I would consider this to be a good start. I'd definitely paint some better textures. In fact, I could be insane and just go over here in Photoshop and throw this lady on top of this lady and start trying to do a little magic with multiply. And this is me combining both maps, which is horrible of an idea, by the way. Don't recommend mixing these two maps. I didn't even go through any Photoshop cleanup because I just wanted to end the video on an interesting note. So we're just gonna open up Photoshop face paint 2, and render it again. Oh look, now there's eyebrows deep down in there. But the eyeballs being white kind of gives it a Mortal Kombat look. I wish I had time to go over the SSS with the eyeballs and continue polishing up the armor, you know, maybe implement a little design instead of just using loop paint, which is what I call it. But I hope that I was able to teach y'all something from this about the basics of UV unwrapping, maybe a little bit on rough face texturing. But if you do have any questions, like I said, do leave a comment. Thank you all for subscribing, and happy blendering. So, toodles.